In the next section of this training, we are going to focus on stress and stress management. So now that you understand the basics about the EAP and how the program supports both employees and supervisors with personal and work-related issues, let's discuss an important topic that is often behind many of the reasons a person may utilize the Employee Assistance Program: stress and how to manage it. Supervisors most certainly deal with various stressors on a daily basis, but sometimes stress can become overwhelming, and if it's not handled well, it can lead to distress and dysfunction. Effective supervisors need to have good stress management skills. But supervisors not only have to be aware of and manage their own stress, they also need to be aware of how their employees are being affected by stress and how their employees are managing these effects. As a supervisor, the way you manage stress sets the example for those you supervise. Hopefully by the end of this portion of our training, you will have a better understanding of some of the common causes of stress and how to reduce and better cope with the stressors you encounter. We are going to examine what stress looks like. We're also going to help you become more aware of what stress symptoms you may currently be experiencing or have experienced in the past. Finally, you will learn techniques that will work for you in managing your stress. As we go through this information, there are two things to keep in mind about stress. Number one, you can't avoid it totally if you're human. And number two, there are lots of different ways to deal with stress. It's just a matter of picking the right technique or techniques for you and your situation. Stress. Everyone's got it. Let's talk about how we can handle our day-to-day stressors more effectively. In order to effectively manage stress, we must first be aware of our own stress level and the stressors we have in our lives. We need to also understand the physiological and psychological reactions to stress. Once you understand this, you can then implement effective stress reduction strategies. Being in the law enforcement field makes you much more likely than other professionals to encounter highly stressful situations on a regular basis. Supervisors who actively manage their stress on an ongoing basis are better prepared to respond to and help others during a crisis and to recover more quickly from acute stress and traumatic events. First, let's look at what stress is. Stress is both a physical and psychological process. It is a feeling of anxiety and/or physical tension in response to a demand placed on us, such as traffic, a wedding, moving, a new job. Now, is stress always a bad thing? No. Stress serves an important purpose by motivating us to take action, allowing us to concentrate our full attention on the threat. It kicks us into the fight-flight response. This can be a good thing. Stress causes us to release chemicals in our body that increase our strength and energy so that we are prepared to respond to a threat. We will talk a little bit more about this later in the presentation. Stress can generate tension, frustration, irritation, or anger. Our reactions to stress are by and large determined by our physical and psychological strengths and weaknesses, our level of resilience. Everyday stress can originate from various sources, including our physical environment, such as a crowded workspace or loud dogs, the social environment, being around those we like, being around those we don't like, physiological processes such as digestion or having a headache from the sun, or from our very own thoughts. Yes, as we think, so shall we be. We can create thoughts that can both increase and decrease our stress levels. This is within our control. In addition to everyday stress, we may also suffer from what is considered cumulative stress. This happens as a result of prolonged and unrelieved exposure to a variety of stressors. This can then result in burnout or other negative physical and psychological consequences. This type of stress is frequently due to a combination of personal, work, and incident-specific events which generate frustration and tension. Being in the law enforcement field makes one highly susceptible to cumulative stress due to the nature of the work, the exposure to multiple traumatic events, and the strains this can have on family and personal relationships. Stressors that employees in law enforcement face by the nature of your job include organizational, field, and family stressors. Let's briefly talk about some examples of what these might be. How about working overtime? I know you all probably have to deal with that. An agent or an officer who is cynical. That could be you or someone you have to work with. There is also fear that an agent or an officer will be injured or killed. There's also the issue of having firearms in the house. Simply observing the existence of firearms in your place of residence can be very disconcerting to the observer. Sometimes hypervigilance exists, which can be very uncomfortable for all parties involved. Other stresses may include overprotection of your family, last-minute cancellation of plans due to emergencies, meetings. We can go on and on. To manage stress well, we first have to understand where stress comes from. According to the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, 25% of workers say their job is their number one stressor. A good portion say their job is very or extremely stressful, and workers feel more stressed than a generation ago. Work-related stress is an important topic because it is usually more significantly correlated with health complaints than other stressors such as relationship or money issues. Look at the last bullet. Risk of a heart attack doubles among employees after a major layoff that doesn't affect their own employment. Unfortunately, stressful job situations are unlikely to disappear in the near future. So the bottom line is, we all need to have a plan to manage the stressors we face at work. We know that change is a part of life and is unavoidable. The reality is that most change is stressful. Yes, even good changes, like falling in love, getting married, having a baby, getting a promotion, they all create stress in our lives. However, without change and some stress, our lives would be pretty boring. So, change and newness is what adds spice to our life, but too many changes coupled with poor stress management increases the possibility of illness. While we may not have control over all the stressors in our life, we do have control over how we feel about the stressor, how we interpret it, and how we cope with it. Customary and anticipated life changes are the changes we all look forward to. We have control over them for the most part, and we can prepare for them. The high school graduate has a timeline. He knows when he will graduate. We make a decision to get married. We know when that date will be. We decide to change jobs. Maybe we make a decision to change careers, employers, etc. We're in charge. Could some or all of these stressors come unexpectedly? Yes, of course. You might not graduate college when you thought you would. Maybe marriage isn't quite what you thought it would be. And maybe moving into your new home as anticipated just isn't working out. However, overall, we would consider these changes and the stresses associated with them to be ones that we have some say-so in. We can prepare for them. We have some level of control. On the other side of change are those life changes that are unexpected. These can certainly cause us stress. This is what can happen when life seems to come at you too fast. We have listed a few examples of changes that you don't have control over. Being in an accident, being the victim of a crime, maybe somebody dies suddenly. These are unexpected and cause a great deal of trauma and stress. All of these stressors, and others that I'm sure you could add to the list, occur suddenly, giving us little time to prepare, and as a result, we feel out of control. There are also stressors that are somewhat expected, maybe such as having issues with your partner. Over time, if these issues continue, they can take a toll on you. These are called progressive accumulating stressors. We do have some control over these stressors and can cope with these types of stressors for short periods of time. But if we don't develop coping skills and these accumulating stressors continue, we will feel the strain. On this slide are some examples of progressive accumulating stressors. Losing things, having to care for someone who's disabled, having job pressures or changes on the job. These issues weigh on us and put us in a position wherein we are not able to function at our best. Finally, I'm sure you've heard the old phrase, "You may be your own worst enemy." Well, this can be a way for us to think about self-imposed stressors or personality trait stressors that are stressors that we impose on ourselves due to personality characteristics or even a habit. Take a look at the list of personality stressors on the slide. If you can identify with one or more of these, it is within your control to make these changes. So often we like to blame others for our stress. Oh, if my supervisor wasn't so hard on me, if my spouse would be just more understanding, if it wasn't so difficult to get the equipment I need, etc., etc. We like to point the finger at other people and other things that we say cause our stress. However, we are the ones in control of managing our stress. That is the good news. Now that we all understand that stress is an unavoidable part of our life and the different types of stress, let's talk a bit about the symptoms of stress and why we have them. Actually, it all began a long time ago when our ancestors had very different stressors than we do today. They developed what is commonly called the fight or flight response. This is our body's primitive, automatic, inborn response that prepares the body to fight or flee from perceived attack, harm, or threat to our survival. It helped early people to avoid becoming lunch to some large carnivorous beast so they could have modern descendants like all of us. Of course, most of our modern-day stressors do not require us to fight or flee. However, our body still responds the same way as if we were preparing for an attack by a dangerous predator. Our brain releases chemicals like adrenaline to prepare our bodies for running or fighting. In this survival mode, our rational thinking is disengaged and the more primitive parts of our brain take over. This can really impair the decision-making process and make it difficult for us to manage the types of non-life-threatening stressors we experience in our day-to-day life. The symptoms of stress affect us physically, mentally, and emotionally. The symptoms on this slide are not an all-inclusive listing, but let me speak about just a few so that you can be more aware of them. As I do, think back about a situation that was particularly stressful for you and identify which type of symptom you experienced as a result of that stress. Not being able to sleep is an indication that there might be some stressors negatively affecting you, especially if you're normally a good sleeper. Different aches and pains in our bodies can also sometimes result from stress. I know sometimes I feel tension in my neck, I get a headache, or even maybe a queasy stomach when my anxiety level is high. Stress causes real physical symptoms. Sometimes the relief of those symptoms only comes when you're better able to get control of the stress you are experiencing. Mentally, we can be affected in the way that we work. We might notice that we can't concentrate the way we usually do because our minds are preoccupied with the stress. Sometimes it affects our ability to remember things or to be able to make realistic decisions. We should never make important decisions when we are in an emotional state because we can find ourselves in a worse situation once the result of those decisions comes to fruition. When we are under stress, sometimes we find that we eat more or eat less, or worse yet, we eat those comfort foods that only serve to increase the fat and sugar intake in our bodies, like ice cream or cake or cookies. Sometimes we may even resort to the use of drugs or alcohol to deal with what we are feeling. Of course, use of these substances has the potential to create a whole additional set of problems. Not to mention that an increased use of drugs and alcohol is quite dangerous and are not constructive stress management techniques. Emotionally, we can experience depression, tearfulness, impatience, rage, and anxiety. So what happens if we ignore our symptoms of stress? Well, the simple answer is, it will get worse. A buildup of unmanaged stress over time not only affects us emotionally, it decreases our quality of life and can even have a serious impact on our physical health. Remember, we mentioned the fact that stress and negative feelings produce certain chemicals to be disseminated into your body. Did you know that the tears of sadness and the tears of happiness are chemically different? Basically, if you're feeling something negative or are upset, your body produces chemicals to counter the negative physical reactions you experience when this happens. Earlier I said how sometimes my stomach will get upset when I am stressed. Well, the reason for this is because the stress is causing acid to be introduced into the stomach. So the stomach then has to figure out how to combat the acid that doesn't belong there. This contributes to stomach aches. This is just one example. Stress can also cause breakdowns in immune system functioning, making us more vulnerable to contracting illnesses. You might be surprised to hear that excessive secretions of stress hormones can actually damage artery linings. The list goes on, as you can see on the slide. So the bottom line is that if stress is part of the equation, stress management must become an important component of the solution for improving our health.